It's taking every bit of strength, actually, for me to stand up here and not say, this event is now in play. So I won't do that. But, yeah, thank you for Tom and Shane and everybody for inviting me today and allowing me to invite other people as well. And I had to have a think about what I wanted to talk about today. And it would have been quite easy for me to stand here and pitch BetAngel at you or me. And I think quite a lot of people know BetAngel or me. And I will pitch it to you for a minute or two. But what I actually thought I would do is talk to you about how and why you should cross a desert. Because actually I think this is probably the most important thing that we're going to be talking about today, because the reason that Betdaq have invited us here is to encourage some growth in the exchange. And I think there's a lot of relevance with the journey that Betdaq are going through and the journey that I went through and that I will continue to go through for the rest of my life. But what I want to talk to you about is a little bit, I'll give you my pitch immediately, about me and about BetAngel. I joined Betfair. It's funny actually hearing Chris talk, because I'm thinking, oh, you bastard, you probably got in there before me. You probably joined before me. And I'm one of few people that actually joined Betfair and the exchange revolution very early on. And I joined on the 18th of June 2000. And Betfair opened, I think, on the 11th of June, or thereabouts, 2000.
You before me.
I was before you, was that great? And it was a funny journey that actually brought me there, because I completely didn't intend to be there at all. And I'd gone through the same experience that a lot of people had gone through, which was you go through your career, you do your job, you get a bit fed up, you have a midlife crisis, and you're looking for another way or something interesting to do. And I'd been interested in sports from when I was young. I won't bore you with the story of how I got there. But I was interested in sports, I was interested a bit in statistics, and I wanted to do something in that arena. But in fact, it was really financial markets that drew me to Betfair and to the exchanges. And it was almost an accident that I actually ended up on the exchanges. That was just one of the things that happened from there. But from there, as soon as I saw the opportunity, I started to do something about it. And I really pushed forward, because so many times in my life I'd seen opportunities come and go. And I'm sure we've all had this story of seeing an opportunity and thinking, that's a great idea. But for most of my life, that's all that I'd done. I'd say, that's a great idea. And then you'd see this guy in the press 6 years later, worth $5 billion, revolutionised some aspect or another. And when exchanges came around, actually this was one time in my life where I actually said, that's a good idea, and I'm actually going to do something about it, to the absolute shock and horror of everybody that was around me. Because when they all said to me, what are you going to do? I said, well, there's this thing called Betfair, and there's this concept called betting exchanges, and I think that there's an opportunity there. And of course, when you've come from a decent career, and you've got 3 young children, and a wife, and all of those responsibilities, when you say to people that you're going to go off and do some gambling, everybody thinks you've completely lost it. And I must admit, there were times when I thought I'd lost it as well. But as it turned out, everything worked out just fine. So, and this was the thing that created BetAngel, because when I joined the markets, there was actually nothing really going on. There was a bit of activity in the markets, some liquidity through there, but really we were right at that formative stage. So I remember the exchanges when they were very young. I knew some of the characters from the business then, and it was just a neat idea back then. Nobody really had any idea of exactly where it would go. And I don't believe that anybody believed it would reach the stage that it actually did. It got much, much bigger, much faster, and had a broader depth than we ever imagined. And of course, none of the bookmakers imagined that as well, which was brilliant for us, because they were too slow to pick up on it. But BetAngel came around because when I first started using the exchanges, I imagined I would be going into financial markets. So I'd spent a lot of time since about, I think it was 93, I got interested in financial markets seriously. And in 96, when the internet was beginning to come together, I was one of the first members of a trading forum for financial markets. And I thought that that's exactly where I was going to go. So when I arrived on the betting exchange scene, the first thing that dawned on me was that actually we needed a better way of doing this. I looked at the markets and I thought they're an insurance or a commodity market. They're very, very similar to financial markets. They're nothing like traditional betting markets, so I want to trade them the same. So that was my first objective, was to set about trying to understand exactly how I could do something within these markets. But the problem that I had is there were no real tools to do that. There were some very basic tools that had been developed around 2003. But for what I wanted to do, I wanted charts, I wanted to plug it into Excel, I wanted to analyse different aspects of the market, I wanted to do fill or kill orders, I wanted to do all these things. But nobody had really addressed it seriously at that point. So I went round some of the people that were in the business at that point, asked them to adopt these things. But of course, producing software is very expensive. And at that time, in the world, in that particular world, it was very risky to do something like that. Why would you spend a lot of money or give up a decent contract to write some software that may not work, that may get banned, that there's no API for, and possibly no future? But I was very fortunate that I did a talk in Lombard Street in London where there was somebody in the audience that had pretty much the same idea as me. So we joined up together and we created Betangel. The little sketch in the middle of the screen that you can see here was like some of my early ideas on how I would expect the product to look. And from those really, I mean, when you look back when the software was first developed, and it was the same for all of us, you know, we had very basic apparatus for what we wanted to do with software. So, you know, we had stunning features such as being able to click on the screen and place a bet. And being able to, you know, offer a bet to the market. These were like breakthrough features back then. But as time has gone on, it's obviously developed significantly since then. And it's the same for every people within software. If you ever want to see what good competition does for a market, have a look at the API software market, because the API software market now is diverse, it's deep, and there's lots of brilliant implementations of different things, and everybody finds their own little niche within the market. Competition is good. And but the reason that we created Betangel was simply because I didn't have the tools around to be able to do what I wanted. So we actually went out and created it. And the funny thing is, the guy that I worked with on the development had a decent contract with BT. He didn't want to leave that contract, so I said to him, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we create the software, but we'll sell it, and that will help fund your escape from the corporate world. So that's what we did. So Betangel was created because of that. And lo and behold, in fact, we didn't really need to worry anyway because exchanges took off and accelerated off into the distance from there anyway. So in fact, that first idea of could we possibly earn enough either by trading or by licensing the software, give us enough to do all of that, didn't turn out to be an issue anyway. And as they say, the rest is history. But when we first created Betangel, the funny thing about it is there was no API. Betfair struggled for ages to get us on the API because we didn't want to be beholden to them. But we did join up to the API eventually, and to Betdaq as well. And when you look back at that period, it's funny because things like keep bets, the API community developed, and then Betfair nicked that and put it into their product. When you look at, everybody called it greening or greening up or hedging or variants thereof, and of course that eventually became cash out. So in fact, I think that the API community needs a big thumbs up for all of the work that they've done, because they really have driven the market. And I think that everybody in the API market has the potential to do that going forward as well. But yeah, Betangel was created for a completely different reason, primarily for us to do clever things, and then obviously the market has developed from there. So it was almost an accidental creation. If software existed at the time at which I joined the market, it may never have been created. And our philosophy with it now is still what we do. We want to keep pushing the product forward, enhancing it, adding new features. And when you look at the software, it's pretty much my journey through the market. As I've discovered something in football, we developed a football module. As I started looking at tennis, we developed tennis. When I wanted to mess around with some ideas, we plugged it into Excel, and so on and so forth. And it's now a combination of the journey that we're seeing through the market and the feedback that we get from users on what they want to achieve. And it's become an entity unto itself now. But the thing that's always been core to me is trading. That's why I joined exchanges. I had some ideas. I thought, if I join the exchange, I'm pretty sure I can make money. Because you look at your average Joe punter in the street, and you're thinking, if I'm on the other side of that, I'm pretty sure I can make some money out of this. And that is actually the thing that's driven me over the years, is the opportunity within the market. It's not necessarily the software or a bit of publicity. It's the opportunity that drives me, and that's something that continues to drive me. And that's why I want to talk to you about how to cross the desert. Because essentially that's what I've done several times throughout my entire trading career. And that's what we're attempting to do with Betdaq as well. And the reason I'm going to use this analogy is because I think it rings true in terms of most people's journey through the markets. Because I've just come back from California, and one thing I love doing is, first thing is, love looking out the window on the plane. I'll never get bored of that for some reason. You look down from 30,000 feet or so, you see all these people below you, and all of the problems that you have suddenly pales into insignificance. But one thing that you notice when you go to the west coast of America is there's a lot of barren land there. And I remember watching a documentary about the early pioneers within America. Of course, they all landed on the east coast, gradually spread out a bit. They reached the Great Plains, and it was just endless grasslands. And they thought, we wonder what's over there, what's on the other side. And that's something that's driven me for pretty much the whole of my life. It's not a question of what's in front of me, but it's always a question of what's over there. It's like walking into a room, opening a door, and seeing another door on the other side. You sort of think, well, you know what? What's on the other side? I've spent my whole life opening doors. And it's the same when you look down from that plane as you're heading towards the west coast. You realise that there's this vast plain in front of you, which the pioneers found. And then there's a bloody vast desert as well. You know, not only did they have to struggle with wagons across the plain, they then sort of thought, what's on the other side of the mountain? It's like, oh, great, fantastic. There's a massive desert. No water, no food or anything. But eventually they reached the other side of the desert, and of course there was the promised land. There was the land of plenty, and fish and Indians, more Indians, Mexicans by the time they arrived. And, but there was a land of plenty. They eventually reached the promised land. And for me, symbolically, Silicon Valley and San Francisco was the promised land for me when I was younger, because I was into technology. You hear about all these fantastic technology stories coming out of San Jose and all of these things. And I spent most of my early career attempting to get to the promised land, which was, for me, was San Francisco. And when I got there, suddenly there's opportunity aplenty. You realise that, in fact, the trek was worth it. Going over, I cheated. I didn't have a wagon and had to go through the grasslands and a massive desert. I just took a plane. But you realise that, in fact, you know, the promised land is on the other side. So my journey through the markets was very, very similar, in that when I first turned up, it was a barren wasteland. There was nothing there. But the thing that drove me all the time was the opportunity that was on the other side. And that's the thing that continues to drive me. And that's what's driving me with Betdaq now, is I get the feeling, and I know already, that in fact there's a bigger opportunity that's coming just around the corner. So when I joined Betfair, as I mentioned already, I joined them very early on. I came across them completely accidentally. So there was this thing in London called First Tuesday. So the first Tuesday of every month, they get entrepreneurs, investors, and techie guys. They'd shove them all in the same room, and it was a bit like a Dragon's Den scenario. Everybody would talk to each other, things would happen, you'd start learning about ideas, you could either fund them, be part of the startup, and so on and so forth. So my interest in this was to go to these meetings and just learn what was going on. I had no perception of this community. I didn't know how to pitch for money or anything like that. I just wanted to be within it. And that was where I first heard about the concept of betting exchanges. That was where the whole idea came across. So for me, I looked at this opportunity and I just thought, well, that smells like an opportunity to me. What I should have done is said, here's 50 grand, give me 50% of the business. And it would have been a different story here. I probably wouldn't be standing here today. But you know, for me, it was just a registering, a little thing in the back of my head that said, oh, you know, this looks interesting. I think there's probably an opportunity there. So I went there because of my interest in financial markets, but I actually left these meetings thinking, well, actually, here's something new that's really exciting. I think there's something that I can do about this. So I joined Betfair very early on, but what greeted me was barren lands. It was a desert. There was nothing there. And liquidity was low. There was no activity in the markets. Half the markets I wanted weren't there. I couldn't do half the things that I wanted. But but I felt that it was worth pursuing that and trying to see what was on the other side, what was over the mountains, what could I actually see. But yeah, initially the start on Betfair was pretty dull and boring. Nothing happened. But what actually did happen was, as the activity started to build, then things began to really take off. So I remember, I think the first ever bet I placed was on golf, rather bizarrely. And then because I knew football really well, I started to mess around on football. And then I started to expand from there. So gradually, you know, I went through the markets, began to identify things that were of interest to me, and started to actively participate in them. But you can see on this graph that I've displayed here, or you may not be able to see because it's got very small writing on it. But you can see the sort of growth that continues to take place over a number of years. On the left-hand side, we've got Q1 2007, on the right-hand side, Q4 2012. But what happened in the markets is, as people started to place just a few bets in the market, people would come in and trade them. And because people traded them, that created more liquidity, which meant that people placed larger bets. And because people placed larger bets, it drove more liquidity. And the whole cycle started to churn up quite dramatically. So it's at this point that, you know, all of the activity really started to come in on racing. And I was thinking, well, I'd love to do something with racing, but I have no idea what it's about. You know, I know that they run really fast. There's a small person on the back. And, you know, I had no perception of any. You know, if you said maiden to me, I thought it was some damsel in distress in a Disney movie. But I had this desire when I saw the liquidity in racing to do something about it. So I went from somebody who had no knowledge of racing whatsoever, had never placed a racing bet, to significant amounts of money through the market. And racing is my mainstay. That's typically where I live most days, most evenings, most mornings, Boxing Day, all bank holidays, and so on and so forth. But I think it's a good demonstration on how actually exchanges can do good, because I'd never been to a racecourse, never placed a bet on a horse race, and now I do it all the time. I've been to Santa Anita, Laytown, all of the big courses in the UK. We're here at Ascot today, and I love it. I enjoy it. And, you know, whenever I've had the opportunity to pitch or talk to people from the racing industry, I'm saying, if it wasn't for exchanges, I wouldn't have paid, you know, 200 quid for this ticket or whatever. I wouldn't have encouraged all these other people. My family wouldn't be here. So, in fact, there's an awful lot of good that can be done. And most of this liquidity is new liquidity. It's money that never existed before in the market. So, yeah, it's a bit of a farce that if the industry ever tells you that it does any harm, because it doesn't. It always does good. You grow the total market. It's a completely different niche as far as I'm concerned. We're all aware of the sportsbook exchange situation, and you have casual punters and you have people that want to do something more serious or perhaps automated. And the whole market has grown because of that. But also, if you look at the contribution that traders make, you know, sometimes traders get a bit of a bad name. But I don't think that that should be an issue at all. Because when you look at the objective of a trader, it's very different from your casual punter or even a serious punter. The casual punter or the serious punter is looking at value. Traders very often do not have a concept of value. They're seeing what's going on in the market, they're trying to anticipate that, and they're trading what they see. But they don't know whether this horse is going to be valued at 7 to 4 or 9 to 4. They really don't understand. So if you actually look at the contribution that people make, this was information that was publicly available. You can see that on this particular occasion, this trader made nearly £250,000, which sounds absolutely immense. But if you look at the figure on the left, this is the amount of turnover that he used in the racing market to make that money. He actually had to put through £150 million to make that £250,000. So if you flip this upside down and invert it in terms of the trader's contribution to the market, you can say that he made 0.16% return on the amount of money that he put through the market. Or, if you're a bit clever about it, you can say that for every pound of profit that he took from the market, because that's what people tend to say when they're trying to represent traders negatively, he actually generated £611 of liquidity. £611 that somebody could bet on, take value on, automate their bet, do any number of things, of which this particular trader would have no concept of. He was there, he got his pound's worth of profit, but in order to do that, the market had the opportunity to bet against him to the tune of £600. And this is where traders and advanced activity really drive growth on exchanges. Because when that liquidity is available, people will bet to it. Because, of course, you try and get £600 on something that's steaming in on course today, and the price will shorten immediately, if they take your bet at all. Try and do it online, and your bet will probably be rejected. Do it on an exchange, and your bet will get matched. The guy on the other side has to take that risk. So it's a very, very efficient risk mitigating system. And if you flip it around again, you can say basically that £1,000 worth of liquidity on this occasion, not everybody's the same, will generate £1,000 worth of liquidity will cost about £1.64 in losses, which is tiny. So yeah, I actually think we need a bigger share of that, don't you? We should be paid for doing it. So, but this changes our view on exactly what an exchange should be. I'll read this out to you. This was a brilliant post that was done by a guy called Armida many years ago. And if you ask me what an exchange should be, this is what it should be. Guy walks into the shop, 20 tenors, please. The other guy replies, oh, you'd be better off putting that on an exchange. It could be as much as 40 on there, less 5% commission, gives you 37 to 1. Guy replies, okay, I'll have a look at that. That's the exchange proposition. It's as simple as that. You will get a better price, you will get matched, and so on. So this guy posted this in September 2008. I'm sure people in the room will remember that date, if they were on Betfair. And the proposition changed from that point. So the guy walks into the shop, says, 20 tenors, please. And the other guy replies, I'll read this out in its full, I'm going to have to turn and face it. You'd be better off putting that on an exchange, as it could be as much as 40 on there, less your commission, which is net winnings multiplied by the market base rate, after your discount rate is converted from your points total, which applied to the market base rate, unless, of course, you've taken a holiday when your points balance will not be credited and your discount rate will remain the same, but you could be subject to a 15% decay. However, if you win, you may qualify for an additional charge of up to 60%, which, dependent on your forthcoming weekly profit in relation to the commission you paid on a lifetime basis now, when there is commission and implied commission calculated by 3% now, not the full market base rate, at the end of the week, you'll find out what price you got. Which, excuse the expression, is crap. Nobody wants that. People want to place a bet, be matched, and that be the end of it. Okay, yes, there's a bit of commission, maybe there's a couple of other things, but that doesn't matter in the scheme of things. They just want to get a better price. If you implement a model like that, that's going to run into trouble eventually. That's going to be a big issue for you eventually. And what I want exchanges to be is what we saw originally. And that's, word of mouth was the biggest thing that grew exchanges in the days when I was first around. Because people would say, what price on England? And you say, go over here. You'll get a better one. Yeah, but what price is England? Don't worry about it. Just place it here. It will be better. And that's where we need to be. And I'm hoping that that's where Betdaq are going to be taking us over time as well. So if you look at what's happening on Betdaq, I'll stick my hand up here and say that I didn't join Betdaq immediately. So you definitely beat me on that one. But I sort of dabbled with Betdaq, didn't do anything seriously, and then in 2008 was when we produced the first version of BetAngel for Betdaq. And thanks to Betdaq support, we were able to launch that for free. But again, not a great deal changed, if I'm completely honest, around that time. Liquidity was growing, it wasn't accelerating massively, but then in 2011 we got another kick, which then made us produce a more up-to-date version of BetAngel, and we released a brand new version this year as well, and we've kept it up to date since then. And in 2011 it all changed for me, because I realised then that I really had to take Betdaq seriously. And that was when I really started to increase my activity on Betdaq. And that was effectively, in terms of what we're looking at in terms of the presentation, was when I crossed the desert. Because I'd been looking at the desert and wondering what was on the other side for ages, but the desert looked big and vast, and it was pretty dry. So in 2011, that was when I got the kick that I needed, and I jumped on the horse and started riding across the desert. And immediately, and I thought I'd put these up here to give you some context, immediately I realised that there was an opportunity there, and there was stuff that I could do. So these are just 3 screenshots from results that I got by trading Royal Ascot in June 2011. And the interesting thing that's happening on Betdaq now, especially in recent years, is that the markets are getting much more liquid and the fill rate is improving. Shane mentioned fill rate earlier. And that's critically important for the sort of activity that I do and lots of people in the room are likely to do. The chance of getting your bet matched is increasing all of the time. And that's opened up much bigger opportunities for me in terms of direct participation in the market. And that's primarily where I'm at. That's what I want to do. So yeah, markets are more liquid, turnover's improving. But also we've noticed that it's easier to identify quality on Betdaq for some reason. I can't explain to you exactly why the reason for that is at this particular moment in time. I'm sure I'll find out eventually. But it is getting easier to identify quality on Betdaq markets. But in terms of direct comparison to Betdaq's competitors, there's hardly any differential in pricing now between one exchange and another. So that's obviously a huge benefit as well. But the interesting thing is if you look at markets elsewhere, the ability for them to deviate significantly from the mean seems to be increasing. You get odd situations. This chart that you can see on here was from the Grand National a few years ago. I was laying Monbeg Dude in the Grand National. This was like, you know, a big race, massive liquidity. And I actually tweeted and posted on the forum that that's what I was doing. But the incredible thing that happened was, as I was laying it on Betfair, suddenly I couldn't get matched any longer, and the price shot out. So there was me suggesting that people lay Monbeg Dude at 20, and as I was trying to do it, I accidentally sent the price out to 40. And I'm thinking, how is that possible? I cannot, you know, the Grand National, one of the biggest races of the year, I cannot be the sole determinant of price on the Grand National. And then as soon as I stopped and gave up, of course, the price reverted back to norm. Whatever the reason for that, it just showed that the markets were getting weaker there. It was easier to push the price around if you were trying to do an outsized bet. And of course, the whole idea was that on exchanges, you don't want that to happen. You want people to take your orders. You don't want to be restricted by proxy, in effect. But ultimately, what we're finding on Betdaq now is that, in fact, that liquidity, that fill rate is improving. So it's presenting more opportunities. So I spend a lot of time, in my birthday in March, my kids gave me a little thing, and I thought, oh, it's a mug. You know, it's like, okay, fair enough. I'll act all excited and happy they've given me a mug. But I actually opened it and fell about laughing, because as I pulled the mug out of the container, it said, I love spreadsheets on it. And I spent so much time in spreadsheets that the kids had cottoned onto this fact and decided that that was the most appropriate gift for me on my birthday. But yeah, we spend a lot of time analysing the markets. That's how I can say confidently to you. I could put up loads and loads of stats and drone on for an hour about how the markets have improved, but I won't. I'll just summarise some of the key characteristics for you. But if you look at the most favourable days of the week, on the left-hand side here, we've got Tuesday. That should be Monday. I don't know why it's Tuesday. I have no idea why that isn't Monday. It could be I don't have enough data. But then you can see the graph climbing off as we head off to the right, and on the right-hand side, we have Saturday, which is exactly what you expect. The highest quality racing is on a Saturday, biggest markets, most liquidity, most prize money. Everything points to Saturday being the best day. So if you look at the graph, that pretty much plays out exactly as expected. So that tells me that the markets are getting more favourable, that they are conforming more to conventional markets. If we go back 8 years ago on Betdaq, that probably wouldn't have been the case, but it is happening now. We can see that. So yeah, if you go on the left-hand side, you've got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. On the right-hand side, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Sunday is always slightly lower liquidity, which is why it appears in the middle of this graph. But essentially, I know I can turn up to Betdaq on a Saturday and I can have a good session. So I turn up to Betdaq every Saturday expecting to do well. And that wasn't the case a few years ago. If you look at the typical volume comparison to other exchanges, the blue line that you can see here is basically plotting out how much turnover does Betdaq do in comparison to other exchanges. But you can see that the graph there pretty much conforms to what we'd expect. Big races do big volume, smaller races do not as much volume. But essentially, what we're noticing is that line on that graph is shifting further and further right as we move on. So basically, the proportion of turnover that Betdaq are doing in comparison to other exchanges is growing. There's more people using it and more money going into the market. The reason for putting up this graph is that middle line that you can see there is Irish racing. So you can see there's an anomaly there. Irish racing is much more dominant on Betdaq. Irish company, more presence within the Irish population, and it's on course as well as driving that? Yeah. So yeah, the on-course market's driving that. So if you do an Irish race on Betdaq. It's just that much more favourable still. That is ahead of the curve for some reason. But yeah, what we've noticed is both those curves are shifting to the right. In other words, they're getting more favourable as time goes on. So that's interesting as well. And the reason that I monitor and look at this is because if I can find favourable markets, I'm more likely to do a good job in them. So that's what I'm searching for all of the time, trying to figure out which is the best pass to cross the desert and get to the promised land. So yeah, all of the evidence that we've got is pointing towards that. And on a personal level, I feel that I have crossed the desert now with Betdaq. It would be very easy for me and others and for my customers to sort of say, well, I'll cross the desert when the desert isn't there. But the fact is that all pioneers, including the early settlers in America, had to cross the desert, had to cross the plains to get to the promised land. When I looked at Betdaq and started, I think our hands were forced to some extent to making sure that that happened. But when I first looked at Betdaq and realised there wasn't significant liquidity for me to do some of the strategies, what I actually did was I just wound the clock back and went back to when I first started on Betfair and thought, what strategies worked then? How did I change my behaviour to what I do now? So for me, it was quite a simple situation. I just went backwards in time, started to reinvent and remember all of the stuff that I did in the early days and started to build forward from there. And I started to build the amount of turnover that I did, the amount of profitability that I had, and started pushing forward from there. And what actually happened was I pretty much feel that I have crossed the desert now. I know that it's going to be a big contributor to me over the next year, over the next few years. 2013 to 2014, my turnover was up 223%. 2014 to 15, it's going to be significantly higher. It will be much, much higher this year. I don't know how much that will be. Some of it will depend upon what I do in the last month. But I look forward to 2016 expecting to do even better again. And I know that some people have experienced the same thing as well, in that markets that they couldn't trade a few years ago are tradable now, and it's viable to do that. I'm much more consistent, and the long-term impact of my activity is that generally I offer bets to the market. So I was very grateful to Shane and everybody for giving me a lower commission for doing that. But typically, most of my strategy revolves around offering bets to the market. So I am adding liquidity to the market. So I think that that virtuous cycle is very beneficial for both of us. And I'm being incentivized for doing that now as well, which is fantastic. But ultimately, my belief is that exchanges just are a much better way of doing business. And I'm grateful to Victor Hugo, this Victorian gentleman here, for summarising what I think about exchanges. It doesn't matter what people do or how they perceive exchanges or the issues that exchanges face in terms of legislation and so on. The fact is, it's a bloody brilliant idea. And therefore, everybody deserves to do it, and everybody that's trying to make an impact in this market deserves to be given our support as well. And as Victor Hugo said, an invasion of armies can be resisted, but not an idea whose time has come. And that is what betting exchanges are entirely for me. And that's what I want you to take away as well, is that I think that there's still plenty of room for the exchange market to grow. I think we need to give support to people that allow us to do that, and we should try and help with that process as well. So thank you for listening to that presentation. I hope it was useful for you. I'm going to be around all day, so if you want to ask any questions on it, then you're welcome to do that. But with that, I will hand over to the next presenter. Thank you very much.